Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk. I am Shekhar Gupta at the Navy House in Delhi, and my guest today, Admiral R.K. Dhowan,
Pleasure meeting you.
Chief of Naval Staff, and I can break a little piece of news to you, which is that in 13 years of Walk the Talk, this is the first time a serving chief is featuring on the show.
What a pleasure and an honor to be on your show, Shekhar.
And it's a double honor for me, a non-swimmer, to have the Chief of Naval Staff.
Delightful.
And there's a reason why. In fact, there are two reasons why. One reason is that it does appear now that with the new government, with our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, there is a new emphasis on the Navy. Because he made his first visit to Defence Forces to the Navy. So did Mr. Arun Jaitley, who was until recently the Defence Minister. So it does look like there is a shift of emphasis. And second, the Navy has been in news, not always for good reasons lately.
Well, I would like to say that it's more for the aspect of matters maritime, because India is essentially a maritime nation with a natural outlook towards the seas. And we have vast maritime interests, which the responsibility of the Navy is to ensure that these maritime interests, which have a vital relationship with the nation's economic growth, are allowed to develop unhindered both in peace and war.
But in India, we had a history of, we had a maritime history, which somehow we seem to have either forgotten or overlooked.
Well, I would like to say we had a tremendous maritime history.
Right.
Our maritime heritage goes back to 3300 BC,
Right.
to the Indus Valley civilization.
Right.
And still today in Lothal in Gujarat,
There's a dry dock.
There's a dry dock dating
Right.
back to 2200 BCs.
Right.
It is from these small ports.
So now we know where Mr. Modi is coming from.
Well, it is from these small ports that seafarers sailed out in their small boats to establish trade and cultural links with Mesopotamia, with ancient Egypt and east coast of Africa. And on the east coast of India, we had the Kalingas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, the Cherias, who sailed off to distant lands in Southeast Asia and established trade and cultural links. And actually we lost our supremacy on the seas during the Mughal period. And that's when the European seafarers came in with the arrival of Vasco da Gama in 1498.
And the Mughals got too caught up in the Deccan and to the west of Delhi.
And I would say a land focus.
Land focus.
And more on the landward frontiers.
So, did we lose our way a little bit somewhere? Because it does look like that over the past, say, 10-15 years, we have lost our edge a little bit. Our force levels have fallen down. Our vessels are getting older.
Well, I would like to say...
And many of the new vessels don't have full equipment.
Let me deal with that.
Right.
The Navy actually has done its planning quite well. And we started this planning...
Which is why this is a surprise.
Yes.
This state.
Our first plan paper was actually written in 1948 itself. And thereafter, we've had a perspective plan every few years. And the first major plan was when we made our maritime capability perspective plan, which was made in 2005 and 6. This is when we looked at the aspect of having a plan which is capability based and mission dominated. We moved away from bean counting. We also linked up the budget requirements to the requirements of our ships, submarine and aircraft which we will have. The planned growth of the Navy did get slowed down in the 80s and 90s because there was a period when we did not have any capital allotted towards the naval projects. But since then it has been slow, it has been steady, I think, and we are at the stage where the Navy is on a threshold of transformation. And right now we have all the aircraft, the ships and the submarine falling into line as far as the inductions are concerned.
Going ahead, but has this sense of urgency also been caused by a series of mishaps which highlighted to all of us the problems in the Navy?
Well, the mishaps is for a different reason. I must say in introspection that the Navy is a highly technological intensive service. It is also a highly professional force. And for every requirement or every task that we have to perform, there is a standard operating procedure. Whenever there is a bypassing of these procedures or any laxity that is shown, then we are giving room for accidents to happen. As you can understand, warships are required to go in harm's way. They carry ammunition, they carry fuel, they have cables, and if you don't follow the procedures,
They are not for pleasure cruises.
they're not for
yes.
pleasure cruises.
Yes.
And things can go wrong.
Right.
The other aspect is that the span in the life of a warship is about 30-35 years. So at any given time, you will have 50% of the Navy which is 20 years old. And that's not an issue because the Navy has actually prided itself in maintaining old platforms. But these old platforms, the chances of having incidents and accidents are a little more. So you have to be much more cautious and follow
So
procedures.
what went wrong in these cases? Was there a common thread or were there different?
I would say
factors?
that these were different issues happening on different ships at different times. But it happened around the same time and happened in particular areas, which was certainly a very, very grave cause for concern. So what did we do? We went back to the basics and reiterated these safety procedures that should have been followed in the first place. We insisted on safety audits. Without waiting for the outcome of boards of inquiry, which take longer time, we instituted these measures, and to make sure that these safety procedures, the standard operating procedures were followed, made compliant, and insisted that this should be a high compliance rate.
But so did findings throw up some evidence that these procedures were being bypassed or short-circuited or shortcut?
The procedures were not being followed in some cases diligently, as they should have
The
been.
safety procedures.
The safety procedures, or not just the safety procedures.
Just the SOPs.
Just the SOPs. When you're out at sea, you follow navigation procedures.
Right.
You follow rules of the road, which are how a ship is to give way.
Not in this country. Don't tell your sailors to follow rules of the road. That's wrong education in India. In India, the bigger vehicle has the right of way. Always.
Well, if you start thinking that way out at sea, you will have an accident.
Right.
So,
did some of that happen at sea?
some aspects were there. As I said, when the procedures are not followed, that led to situations when we had accidents at sea. We had also accidents which were material issues, that means maintenance aspects. There were aspects related to the procedures, as I said, not
With the
being followed.
submarines, what were the issues?
The submarine was also issues related to the procedures and the aspects of the planning aspects of the submarine being followed, the aspects related to the procedures being followed when certain things are carried out in terms of ammunitioning, procedures not being followed when an incident of fire takes place on board, what are the action to be taken.
Right.
If the action taken is not with alacrity and in accordance with the laid down procedure on board a submarine, something more will happen.
Yeah. What is a submarine? It says fuel and explosives.
And explosive. And it's totally enclosed compartment,
compartment.
which is underwater.
Right.
So the chances of error are there, but those chances of error then have to be dealt with with alacrity.
But there was a lot of criticism at that point that, I mean, not so much of the Navy as maybe of the government and that sort of permanent villain, the bureaucracy, that Indian Navy does not have a submarine recovery vehicle, or vessel, whatever you call it. Is that a lack? Is that something we're going to get, or is that something you think we don't need?
The submarine rescue
Yeah.
vehicle is something which is required and is something which had been wanted by the Navy for some time. As you know that we have a defense procurement procedure which is protracted, and as part of following that procedure, though the procedure had been initiated, it did not come to culmination where actually we had the DSRV when we needed one. Currently now the DSRVs are being acquired, we are at the final stage of acquisition, and the procedures have been speeded up.
And where are they coming from, if I may ask you?
Well, this one is from the UK.
From the UK. And if we had an SRV at that point, submarine rescue vehicle, you think it would have been, there was a possibility of saving a few lives?
No.
No.
Because this incident that you're referring to on board Sindhu Rakshak happened inside the harbour.
Right.
Actually, the submarine just went down a few meters
Right.
alongside.
Right.
So it was not an issue of saving lives.
Right.
The impact of the explosion that took place was such that the chances of survival were very little. So in this particular case, the DSRV has a role to play when you're out at sea
Right.
and an incident happens and the submarine is at a particular depth and you need to rescue people from those
Right.
depths.
Right.
That's when the DSRV comes in.
Right. And the latest accident under your watch? Vizag?
This is of the Torpedo recovery
Right.
vessel.
Tiny
This is
vessel.
tiny vessel, which is over 30 years old. The job of this vessel is primarily, the role is that when we carry out torpedo firings, it carries out recovery of these torpedoes. On that particular day also, we had carried out 2 torpedo firings. One was recovered. In the process of recovering the other, there was some delay. And on its return passage, about 30 miles of Vizag where it was, when it was returning, there was some flooding which took place in the after part of the vessel. The crew on board did take measures, had the dewatering pumps to pump out, but the flooding was beyond control and the vessel went down. I must state one thing here, that it was the actions taken to have the fleet ships which were in the vicinity to close in and thereafter carry out the search and rescue operations with which we could save 23 lives. Otherwise, the loss of life could have been higher. But that said apart, it is something which is an unfortunate incident and something which we take very seriously. And we
frankly unacceptable.
And unacceptable. That something should sink so rapidly.
Right.
And therefore, we would like to take out all efforts and make all efforts to ensure that the cause of the accident as to where the flooding took place from, whether it was from the stern glands, whether it's from the rudder stalk or it's some plate that gave way, will be examined to its greatest detail.
Have you pulled the ship out yet?
No, we haven't. We had a vessel which went down and took the videography, fairly close ones. We'll be analyzing that and then come up with a plan.
Yeah, because such a thing should not happen again.
Should not happen again.
Because you say that Navy's job is hazardous. As they say in the Air Force, if you don't like the risk, don't fly fighters, right? But when so many happen in a sequence so quickly, then a common citizen which loves the Navy starts worrying.
It is a cause for concern for us, and therefore we've taken all the measures possible, and we have a huge Navy of relatively 140 ships and submarines. We have over 200 aircraft.
And you have a lot of ships coming up, I noticed.
We have 41 ships and submarines under construction.
In Indian shipyards?
Yes.
All of them?
All of them, because the blueprint of the future in the Navy has been based on self-reliance and indigenization. And that is the reason why we have all the 41 ships and submarines, ranging from aircraft carriers to submarines, built in Indian shipyards, both public and private. And it is our intention to increase the indigenous content so that future warships can be truly made in India.
And to also increase the private sector content.
And the private sector content and participation. And indeed, some of the newer ones which are coming in, like the LPDs, the bids are in from the private shipyards.
I think for a common audiences, you will have to. I know you Fauji's love acronyms.
LPD is a landing platform dock. It is an amphibious ship, a fairly large one.
Right.
We have one of a similar type, which is the Jalashva, which we acquired from the United States as the ex-Trenton. And now we will be building 4 of our own within the country. We also have the anti-submarine warfare shallow water craft. They will also be made within the country, and so on.
And submarines.
And submarines, yes.
75
India now is a project which the proposal is that we will have them built within India.
Navy is India's size. Do we need carriers? Can we afford carriers? I mean, such large capital assets in this time and age.
You must understand that maneuverability and flexibility are most important in naval operations. The Navy, if it needs to operate in the blue waters of the Indian Ocean, the aircraft carriers required both for air defense of the fleet as well as for the strike components of its fighters. You cannot tether the Indian Navy to the range from the coastline. You need to operate in the blue waters. If on a particular day we were to ask you where a particular airfield was, you would say it is in so-and-so location, and on the second day it will be in the same location. But an aircraft carrier could be here today and tomorrow anywhere else in the Indian Ocean region. So when you have blue water operation requirements and to operate in the Indian Ocean region, you need to have the flexibility to operate an aircraft carrier, both for the air defense of the fleet as well as to have the strike and punch to take on the fight.
So what is the status of our own aircraft carrier, which we are building at Cochin?
Which we are building at Cochin is coming along well. We had carried out the launch, and right now it's in the process of being outfitted, where the equipment will be getting on board, and it is our intention to see that the aircraft delivery takes place in end of 2018. That is the plan.
And which aircraft?
Well, we will be operating the MiG-29. It has the capability. It can also operate the LCA, and we are eagerly looking into the aspect where the LCA trial will also progress, and so that it will also operate from our indigenous aircraft carrier.
So are we planning to build more carriers? The reports that Americans have offered to help us build carriers in JVs.
Well, we are certainly looking at the aspect of, this is IAC-1 which we
Right.
have, to looking at the IAC-2, the project report as to what the size, shape, the aircraft component is all being worked out. This is what we will be presenting as a proposal to the ministry, and then take on the aspect of building the IAC-2, which also our intention would be to make within India.